today's learned speaker, CA Srirang Hardikar. May I request everyone to rise for the CA motto song. Yamonji, can you please play the CA motto song? Yamonji?
Wait for a second. You can directly start the session. I think some technical issues.
Okay, we will go ahead with the session. May I request CA Keyur Bani to introduce today's learned speaker, CA Srirang Hardikar. Keyur, can you please take the charge? Hello, Keyur, are you there? Keyur?
Keyur is not yet joined. Only Sanjay sir.
Is there?
I have already contacted him. Okay, maybe some technical difficulties must be there on Keyur's end.
Anand, just a second. We can start with a CA motto song.
Yes.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं पुरुषो निर्विमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते तस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदुन्नाद्यति कश्चन एतद्वैता
Thank you, Yomon. Keyur, are you there? Cannot hear your voice. Maybe some technical difficulties are there from Keyur's end. Okay, we'll begin with the session. May I request today's learned speaker, Srirang Hardikar, to please take charge of the session. Srirang, please.
First of all, I am thankful to the Panvel CP Study Circle for giving me this opportunity. I am doing this something like this for the first time. So in our language, this is my first attempt. So the topic for today is related party transactions, provisions and disclosures under Companies Act 13 vis-a-vis accounting standards. So the reason for taking up this topic is this is a very, in a way, a neglected topic. What we do in finalization of the books of accounts and financial statements is we do all the reconciliations of GST, TDS, tax audits, and compliances with all other standards and applicable laws, tax laws, and finalize the balance sheet. And when we come to the notes part, then we realize that there is something called as related party transactions which needs to be disclosed. Then we start finding what are the related party transactions. Then we report them as they are. I'm not saying this is done in every case, 100% cases, but most of the cases or many cases I have observed that this happens in case of small companies because of scarcity of time in a way. So now we are in the month of July. I don't know when we will be finalizing the books of account due to this Corona thing, but shortly we should be get involved in that. So I think it is very much necessary for all of us to understand what are the procedures to be followed while entering into the related party transactions, and what are the disclosure requirements as per the Companies Act, as per the accounting standards also. So we will start with the presentation. I think the presentation is visible to all.
Yes, visible.
Is it visible? Yeah.
Yes, sir. Visible.
Okay. So we'll start with this. So first of all, we need to understand that in every business there are bound to be some related parties. So in case of, let's say in case of a company, there is a director, there is a promoter. If we have a holding company or a subsidiary company, these companies are created so that some kind of transactions will happen with them. So in every company there has to be some related party transactions. It is very difficult that no related party transaction, no transactions with any promoter director happens. So it's a normal feature of any business, and it is not always disadvantageous also. So it is not that they are in a way prohibited transactions. They are not at all prohibited. The problem arises where there is a possibility of favored treatment in terms of pricing or other conditions like credit period or something like that, where one party benefits out of at the cost of loss of another party. So we just to initiate, so every transaction with a related party may not be a related party transaction under Companies Act, but every related party transaction under Companies Act has to be with the related party, because there are some transactions which are with related parties, but they are not covered under the respective section of the Companies Act. So not all the transactions are covered under this. Related parties and related party transactions both are defined under Companies Act also and the accounting standards also, but there are many differences in these two definitions. We will go through them also. Then we will see related party transactions. Where do we consider where they are to be disclosed, or where the procedure for them has to be followed? So first, Section 188 and Section 189 of the Companies Act describe the related party relationships, the registers to be maintained. Then accounting standard 18 or Ind AS 24, as the case may be, there is a separate standard for this related party disclosures. So they talk about only about disclosures of related parties, how to be disclosed in the balance sheet. Then we have under income tax Section 48(2)(b), where certain disallowances are done due to excessive expenditure in nature. So there are some relationship defined under 48(2)(b), where we need to be careful in ensuring that they are not excessive in nature. So there also we need to take care of this. Then transfer pricing is all about related party. Since 2-3 years, the domestic transfer pricing has been done away. So majoritarily related party transactions are with the international associated enterprises. Now domestic transfer pricing are very limited transactions are get attracted. Also in goods and services tax, GST, there are certain transactions with related parties, and there are certain provisions for valuation with respect to supply to those related parties. So these are broadly the areas where related party transactions are taken place, where the auditor has to look into this, the relevant provisions and how they are to be disclosed. Now we come to Companies Act. We'll start with Companies Act. So now out of all this, we are targeting first and second. So Companies Act 188 and 189 and Accounting Standard 18. We are not touching Ind AS 24, it will be a separate topic. So let's come to Companies Act. Now this I'm sure this movie we all must have seen. So this is the $1 million question to determine this relationship. So a company typically what it does is if company feels that this is a related party, then company should ask this question, naam aapke hai kaun? And if you get this answer, then we move to the definition. The definition, and we see that does this relationship is covered under this definition. The definition is given in 2 subsection 76. Let us read that. Related party with any with reference to a company means. Now it says means. It does not say includes. It does not say as may be prescribed. So this is the exhaustive list. These are the only related party relationships that are covered in this. So first is a director and a relative. A director and a relative, his relative is always related party. Then key managerial personnel or his relative. Key managerial personnel are defined in the Companies Act as CEO, CFO, CS, managing director, full-time director, and one level below directors, as may be defined by the company. So if they are there, they are the related parties. Then in a firm in which a director, manager, or his relative is a partner. So partnership firm in which director or managerial partner is also a related party. Then a private company in which director or manager or his relative is a member or director. Even if he is a member in a private company, then also that private company is related to the reporting company. Then a public company in which a director or manager is a director and holds along with his relative more than 2% of his paid-up capital. So this is pretty simple. There is a public company in which a director holds 5%. So that public company is a related party for this private company or this reporting company. Then any body corporate whose board of directors, managing director or manager is accustomed to act in accordance with this advice, directions or instruction of a director or manager. Now this accustomed to act means he is not required to be bound by the instructions, but he generally accepts those instructions because of his influence. That is also possible, and if it is there, this body corporate becomes related party for the company. Then any person on whose advice, directions or instructions a director or manager is accustomed to it. Now this is in a reverse way. If company A's director is acting as per the instruction given by Mr. Y, so Mr. Y becomes a related party. There is a proviso to this, that nothing in this clause 5 and 6 shall apply to the advice, directions, instructions given in a professional capacity. So if Mr. Y is giving some advice, he's a tax consultant, let's suppose, and he is giving advice to the company that you should file appeal, and the company files appeal. So we cannot say that a company is acting as per the instructions given by Mr. Y, because Mr. Y is a consultant, he is giving his opinion in a professional capacity. So by virtue of only of this, he doesn't become a related party. Next is any body corporate which is a holding subsidiary or an associate of company of such company. Any subsidiary of holding company to which it is also a subsidiary. But the first, any holding or subsidiary or associate company. Second, the fellow subsidiary. That means we have a common holding company. The fellow subsidiary is also a related party for the company. And then an investing company or venturer. So venturer means the investing company or a body corporate whose investment in the company would result in the company becoming an associate. So I am associate of somebody else. So if I am associated of somebody else, then that person, that company is also my related party. So in first clause, we have my holding company, my subsidiary company, and my associate company. So I have invested less than 50% in some company, which is more than 20%. So that is my associate. So that is covered as my related party. If I am associate of some company, then that company is also my related party. Okay. I know there will be many questions, but let us take questions at the end, right? And then last is such other person as may be prescribed. Now, what is prescribed is only one relationship is prescribed. So Rule 3 of Company Specification of Definition Details Rules 2014 prescribes that a director other than an independent director or key managerial personnel of a holding company or his relative shall be deemed to be related party. So director of a holding company is not specifically covered anywhere in the first list. So that has been prescribed that director of my holding company will be my related party. So this was definition of related party. It's an exhaustive definition. I think majorly all the related parties are covered in this, and only these many are covered. So any other related party will not be covered in this. Then somewhere they have written director and his relative, managerial person and its relative. So they have defined relative also. Relative has been defined in section 2 subsection 77. Relative with reference to any person means anyone who is related to another if they are members of HUF. So members of HUF are always related. So if company A's director is Mr. X, who is having a HUF in which Mr. Y is a co-personal, then Mr. Y also becomes related party to this company. This is what they are saying. Then they are husband and wife. So husband and wife are always related. So a director's wife is also related for a company. Then as may be prescribed, one person is related to another in such manner as may be prescribed. Now what is prescribed is Rule 4 of Companies Specification of Definition Details, Rule 2014, prescribes as follows: father including stepfather, mother including stepmother, son including stepson, daughter. Now they have not included stepdaughter. Why? I don't know. I mean, is there any intentionally they have not included it, or maybe a drafting error? We don't know. But as a plain reading, stepdaughter is not included. Then brother including stepbrother, sister including stepsister, son's wife and daughter's husband. Again, relative definition starts with means. So this is again an exhaustive definition. No other relationship can be captured in this. Okay. Then we come to the main section, the related party transactions. Now the section prohibits some transactions to be entered unless they are approved by the board of directors. So unless consented by board of directors in a board meeting by resolution, no company shall enter into any contract or arrangement with related parties subject with respect to. Now in this section also they have given exhaustive list of transactions that can be covered in this. Any other transaction is not covered. So only 7 transactions. First is sale, purchase or supply of any goods or materials, selling or otherwise disposing of or buying property of any kind, leasing of property of any kind, availing or rendering of any services, appointment of any agent for purchase or sale of goods, materials, services or property. Such related parties appointment to any office or a place of profit in the company, its subsidiary company or an associate company, underwriting the subscription of any securities for derivatives thereof of the company. So only these many transactions are covered. So we need to first check who all are the related parties of the company. Then we need to check whether any transaction of this kind has been entered into during the year. If they are entered into, then the board of directors approval must be there. And we go to next slide. As we said, the list of transactions mentioned is exhaustive. No words such as includes or as may be prescribed. So only these transactions are covered. We should understand that they are not prohibited transactions. The company can enter these transactions after necessary approvals. Now, the board of directors approval is a mandatory thing, and then they have given some limits. If the company crosses that limit, the company will have to go to shareholders for their approval. But in that case also, board of directors approval is necessary. So even if the limit is crossing, board of directors will approve it, and then shareholders will have to again approve it in a general meeting, extraordinary general meeting or annual general meeting. The limits we will see later in the later slides. For transactions between holding and wholly owned subsidiary, so there may be n number of transactions between holding and subsidiary. Holding and wholly owned subsidiary whose books are consolidated in holding company's books and they are placed before AGM of the holding company, where this shareholders approval by shareholders is not necessary even if the limits are crossing. So that relaxation has been given. Now board approval has to be done like this. The agenda for board meeting should specify all the details with respect to transactions with related parties, such as nature of relationship, transaction, material terms, pricing mechanism, advances paid, received, etc. Because this, if there are 10 directors and only 2 of them are interested or 2 of them are involved in this, so rest 8 directors should be aware of what the contract is, what is the implication of that contract, what are the terms, and why this contract is being entered into by the company. Is it necessary or not? They should understand. That's why this board meeting agenda will have to specify all this. Then interested director not to remain present in the meeting while discussion. Now this is very important because an influential director can always have his say in all the decisions of the company. So in case of those contracts where any one director or 2 directors are involved, the auditor must check the board meetings, board minutes, and whether during that discussion whether he was present or not. That is also to be seen. And this is no approval is required if transaction is being entered into ordinary course of business and transactions are on arm's length basis. Now this is very important. This is a very convenient and safe way for a company to say that this transaction is in the ordinary course of business and it is at arm's length, so that this section 188 itself is not applicable. So no approval is required, no shareholders approval, no directors approval is required. If this is ordinary course of business and transaction is on arm's length basis. Now this is very difficult to determine whether it is in ordinary course of business or not, or it is on arm's length or not. We will discuss it later when we discuss this particular clause in CARO. A member not to vote in resolution to approve any contract arrangement if is a related party. Obviously, if the limit is getting crossed and shareholders approval is necessary, then in that meeting the concerned member is not allowed to vote on a resolution. Of course, some relaxation has been given to some small closely held companies where the majority 90% or more members are relatives or promoters. In that case, let's say husband and wife are those shareholders. So if one is not voting, the other cannot. So there cannot be any resolution. So this relaxation has been given. So where 90% or more members in numbers are relatives of promoters, this particular clause is not applicable. So he can vote. Then every such contract or arrangement should be referred in board report. So if this is this section 188 is applicable to a contract, then all these contracts will have to be reported in board report along with justifications why these contracts were entered into and what are the material terms. Now monetary limits over which approval from shareholders is necessary. So as I said, there are some limits over which the board approval is not sufficient. The company will have to go to shareholders for their approval. Now there is a catch, because in financial year 1920, the one for which we are auditing now, there are 2 types of limits. So before 18 November 2019 and after that, because on this date the rules were changed. So for again there are 7 categories. The first is sale, purchase or supply of any goods or materials. In that case, the earlier limit was 10% or more of the turnover of the company or 100 crores, whichever is lower. Now whichever 100 crores has been removed. So the limit is only 10% or more of the turnover of the company. So if this crosses this limit, then you will have to go to shareholders. Again, we will have to see this transaction when it was entered into, because it has to be done at the initiation stage. It cannot be done later. So at the time of initiating this contract, if this is prior to 18th November, we'll have to check this limit. Otherwise, we'll take this limit. Then selling or otherwise disposing of or buying property of any kind. Now the earlier limit was 10% or more of the net worth of the company or 100 crores, whichever is less. Again, this 100 crores has been removed. So now it is only 10% or more of the net worth of the company. Firstly, it was turnover. Now it is net worth because property is involved. Third, leasing of property of any kind. So there were 3 limits first. 10% or more of the turnover of the company, 10% or more of the net worth of the company, or 100 crores, whichever is lower. Now they have kept only the turnover, 10% or more of the turnover of the company. Availing or rendering of services, 10% or more of the turnover of the company, or 50 crores, whichever is lower. Again, 50 crores has been removed, only 10% or more of the turnover of the company. Appointment of any agent who is a related party for purchase or sale of goods, materials, services, or property. Now, in this there is no change. So 10% or more net worth of the company, or 10% or more of the turnover of the company, whichever is lower. The same limit has been kept as it is. Such related parties' appointment to any office or place of profit in the company, its subsidiary company or associate company. The limit is same. Earlier it was remuneration over 2.5 lakhs per month. The same limit has been kept after also. So in E, F, and G, the limit has not changed. Underwriting the subscription of any security, this is the last transaction. This is 1% of net worth. It is 1% of net worth. So if we exceed this amount, then additional approval from shareholders is necessary. Now these limits will have to be seen based on the audited financial statements for the preceding financial year. So obviously, because we cannot see current financial year, because we have to see the 10% or more of the turnover of the company, we cannot determine turnover of the company for the current year. So we will have to take it for the last year. Then there is a specific requirement of keeping register of contracts. So the company has to keep registers giving separately the particulars of all contracts to which 188 or 184 applies in MBP4. So for all the contracts to which section 188 applies and 184 applies, the company needs to keep a separate register in MBP4 whereby all the details of the contracts are given. 184 is 184 says that if director is interested, he should express his interest. He should not be present in the meeting and all those things. So that also has to be captured in MBP4, and a contract has to be kept. Now this is some relaxation is there, not applicable to contract where value of goods and material or cost of services does not exceed rupees 5 lakhs in aggregate. So if the contract value does not exceed the 5 lakhs rupees, then this is not this register need not be kept. So this contract need not be captured in that register. Now these registers are to be placed before the next meeting of the board and signed by all the directors present. This is procedural part. Registers to be kept at the registered office of the company and to be open for inspection during business hours. The registers need to be produced at commencement of AGM and can be open throughout the meeting. Then penalties. So heavy penalties are involved in violation of 188. If any director or employee enters into transaction, it shall be punishable with, in case of a listed company, imprisonment for a term which may extend to 1 year, or with fine which shall not be less than 25,000, but which may extend to 5 lakh rupees, or with both. And in case of other company, unlisted company, imprisonment is not there, but fine which shall not be less than 25,000, but which may extend to 5 lakh rupees. So these are the major provisions of section 188. Then as far as we are concerned as auditors, we will have to report it in, there is a specific clause in CARO 20 also. So there is no change in CARO 16 to CARO 20, the same clause continues. So clause 13 says whether all transactions with the related parties are in compliance with section 177 and 188 of the Companies Act wherever applicable, and the details have been disclosed in the financial statements as required by the applicable accounting standard. So not only compliance with section 188 or 177 is required, but also the accounting standards compliance is also required to be checked. So before commenting on the above clause, the auditor should satisfy himself that all relevant provisions of the Companies Act have been complied. So all relevant provisions of the section 188 and the requirement as per accounting standards. Now, as we saw earlier, the usual contention or very convenient contention of the company would be that the transaction with the related party, though it is covered in those 7 criteria, it is in the normal course of business, and it is on arm's length basis. So auditor will have to check whether it is really in the ordinary course of business, or it is really on arm's length basis. So determining arm's length. Section 88 defines arm's length as arm's length transaction means a transaction between two related parties that is conducted as if they were unrelated, so that there is no conflict of interest. Now, these kind of things are in a way difficult for an auditor to check. He has all the resources, but factors the auditor will have to check the factors deciding whether it is at arm's length or not will be benefits for each party. So which party is gaining what, which party is gaining, which party is losing. Then prevalent industry practice, what practices are there in the industry, how the other competitors in the industry are working, economic circumstances, then contractual understanding between the parties that one needs to check. If there are any undue advantage to somebody else at the cost of other, if it is there. Then similar contract with unrelated party. This is similar like we have cup transaction in transfer pricing. So similar contracts with unrelated parties means the company, if the company has entered into similar contract with somebody other than the related party and with the same volume, then it can serve as a tool to determine whether the transaction is on arm's length or not. So if we can get those purchase invoices or sales invoices, purchase orders, then we can verify them and conclude that the transaction is at arm's length and need not be reported. Transfer pricing study documentation can be a source where we can actually see, because transfer pricing study documentation is for that only, whether it is in arm's length or not. That is determined by the transfer pricing study documentation. So we can refer to that and conclude. Then ordinary course of business, it is not defined anywhere. It may not be easy to define, because suppose a director has leased a flat to company and company is using it as a guest house and it is paying rent as per market rate. So it is at arm's length because it is paying rent at market rate. But is it really necessary for the company? What is the use of the guest house? That auditor should inquire. And it is very subjective, because this depends on case to case basis, client to client basis. So auditor needs to be very alert to what is the requirement of this transaction and the terms of the transactions. So one guidance can be taken from SA 550 related parties. Paragraph 825 gives you some examples, which are corporate restructuring and acquisitions. This is clearly not a normal course of business. International transactions with entities of jurisdictions having weak taxation laws. So we know that there are countries who are tax havens. There are no taxes. So the tendency of some of the companies or multinational groups is that accumulation of all the income in that country so that it is not taxed. So we need to check that angle also. Then leasing of premises with no or adequate consideration that we discussed. So the auditor needs to consider various factors like object clause of MOA. So if any activity is not covered under object clause of MOA, that is clearly not in the ordinary course of business, so that we can point out frequency of transactions, how many times this transaction is happening. Is it a recurring kind of a thing or a one-time activity? Then business purpose of the transaction, is the transaction necessary for the business? And then size and volume of transactions. And historical practices. Has the company historically doing this, or it's a new thing that we can see? So this is all about provisions of Companies Act. Okay, now we move to accounting standards. There is a separate accounting standard for related party disclosures. Now this is a disclosure standard. Sir, can I move forward, or am I audible, or is there any issue?
Your voice is clear. You can go ahead.
Okay. We move to accounting standards. Related party disclosures. This is a disclosure standard. So we know all accounting standards do not prescribe accounting treatment. Some of them are purely disclosure standard. This is one of them. So cash flow statement, segment reporting, earning per share are all disclosure standard. They do not prescribe any accounting treatment. So And this accounting standard is not to be applied where such disclosure conflicts with the duties of confidentiality. So if a bank is presenting its financial statements, bank needs to maintain confidentiality of the account holders. So if there is any related party, the company may not or should not give this disclosure, even accounting standard required, because accounting standard has specifically said that this accounting standard is not to be applied. Then if you are preparing consolidated financial statements, we give this information of all entire group as a single reporting entity. So in that also intra-group transactions are not there because we eliminate them. So there is no point in taking that into related party disclosure. So they are not to be disclosed under related party. It is mandatory for level 1 enterprises only. So level 1 enterprises are listed companies or which are in the process of listing, banking company, insurance company, or companies having turnover of 50 crores or more in the previous year, or borrowings of 10 crores or more in the previous year. So these are only big companies which are covered in this. However, the Companies Act also requires some kind of disclosure. So if companies are requires your disclosure and accounting standard exempts you, the stricter interpretation will prevail. So you will have to disclose as per the Companies Act. So there is no, it is not like that it is not prescribed by the standard, so will not disclose it. If Company Act wants it, so you will have to disclose. Now disclosure of transaction is mandatory. If disclosure of effect of influence of related parties which do not lead to transactions is not required. So if I am doing some business and my competitor is into the same business, if the competitor acquires me and asks me to stop the operations, I stop these operations, right? So this is a kind of a transaction which has been influenced by my holding company, but this does not amount to any actual transaction. So I need not disclose that effect of influence. If there are transactions, only the transactions are to be disclosed, not the influence. Then the accounting standard lists down the related party relationships that are to which this standard applies. So that first is the enterprises that directly or indirectly through one or more intermediaries control or are controlled by or under common control with the reporting enterprise. That means my holding company, my subsidiary company, and my fellow subsidiaries. These are covered in the first. So these are my related party relationship that are covered by accounting standard 18. Associates or joint ventures of the reporting enterprise and the investing party or venturer in respect of which the reporting enterprise is an associate or joint venture. So my joint venture, my associates, they are covered. Then also if I am associate of somebody else, then that company is also covered. So just like the definition in Companies Act, this is covered. Individuals owning directly or indirectly any interest in the voting power of the reporting enterprises that gives them control or significant influence. Now control and significant influence are the very important terms of the accounting standard 18. So this point says if any shareholder has that much voting power which controls the entity or has significant influence over the entity, so for that entity that person is a related party. So this talks about shareholding. The first talked about holding subsidiary relationship, fellow subsidiaries. Second one talked about joint venture associates and reverse associates. Third one talked about the shareholders. Then key management personnel and relatives of such personnel. Now key management personnel under standard accounting standard 18 is not defined. It is defined, but it is very vague definition. So this is in a way for directors and other KMPs and their relatives. So they are covered. And then enterprises over which any person described in C or D is able to exercise significant influence. So the major shareholder or director, if he owns some company or he owns some partnership firm or he owns some proprietorship firm, that is covered in related party relationship for this company, for the reporting company. So this includes enterprises owned by directors or major shareholders of the reporting enterprise and enterprises that have a member of key management in common with the reporting enterprise. Again, this is an exhaustive list. The standard specifically said key only these many relationships are covered in this for under this standard. So no other relationship can be covered. Then the standard has also said what are not deemed to be related parties. So two companies simply because they have a director in common. So if two companies have a director in common, it is probable that they are related, but for some other reason, maybe because of shareholding, common control. But just because a director is common, they don't become a related party. That's what they are saying. By virtue of economic dependence on any single customer, supplier, franchisor, or any other person. So in this, they are saying, if my entire material, raw material, I am purchasing from somebody, Mr. X. So for that reason only, Mr. X doesn't become my related party. Now, if we see section 92, where associated enterprises for international transfer pricing are defined under income tax, there they have said if we are procuring 90% of more of the raw materials from a single supplier outside India, he becomes my associated enterprise. So there is a change in definition everywhere. So related party definition changes by act to act. So it is different in Companies Act, it's different in accounting standards, it's different in income tax act also. Then in the course of normal dealings with an enterprise, by virtue of only of those dealings by providers of financial, I am taking entire loan from Bank of India. Bank of India doesn't become a related party. Again, trade unions and government departments, they, by virtue of only this, they don't become my related parties. Then we see some important definitions given by the standard. Related parties definition, they have stated related parties relationships also, and they have related party definition also. Both lead to same conclusion or maybe confusion, but it is there, both are there. If one party has the ability to control the other party or exercise significant influence over the other party in making financial or operating decisions, this is open definition. Then those persons, KMP definition of KMP, those persons who have the authority and responsibility for planning, directing, and controlling the activities of the reporting enterprise. Now, key managerial personnel in the Companies Act has been very specifically defined. So only CFO, CEO, CS, managing director, whole-time director, or anybody appointed as KMP is only KMP. As per standard, any person can be KMP if he is responsible for planning, directing, and controlling the activities of the company. So that's a definition. That's a difference in definition. Then relative, again, this definition of relative is different from what is there in Companies Act. Now, in relation to an individual means the spouse, son, daughter, brother, sister, father, and mother, who may be expected to influence or influenced by that individual. So son's wife, daughter's husband, stepson, stepdaughter, stepbrother, stepsister, they are not covered. So it is a narrow definition. Companies Act has a wider definition. Then we, once we have done this, we check whether this is a related party or not. So these are some tests to determine. Now, if we see related party definition, what does it say? If one party has the ability to control the other party, so there is a control and exercise significant influence over the other party. So let us see the definition of control. So definition is control is defined as ownership directly or indirectly more than half voting power. So somebody is owning more than half voting power, obviously he controls the company. Control of the composition of board of directors. Now, composition of board of director does not mean the entire board of directors has to be appointed that person. If he controls the composition, or if he has power to appoint even more than half of the board of directors, then it can be said that he has control over the composition of board of directors, and he has the control of the company also. Then substantial interest in voting power and power to direct the financial and or operating policies. So if he has a 25% stake, and by virtue of any agreement, he has the ability to direct the financial and operating policies, he again has said to have the control of the company. So these three conditions we will have to check in each of the parties whether these are followed or not. Then we will decide whether it is a related party or not. Then significant influence, participation in the financial or operating policy decisions, but not control of these policies. Now again, by virtue of any agreement or contract, if someone exercises control over the participation in the financial or operating policy decisions, he is said to have the significant influence. So again, here related party has been defined as ability to control the other party and exercise significant influence. So even if one is there, so if there is no control but there is significant influence, then also he becomes a related party for the company. Then we go to related party transaction. Definition of related party transaction: a transfer of resources or obligations between related parties regardless of whether or not a price is charged. This is a very open definition. If we have seen the related party definition in Companies Act also, where 7 type of transactions have been defined. Only those are the related party transactions. But under this accounting standard, this is a very open definition. Anything can be covered. So if you have observed, there we had 7 types of transactions, but no loan transactions. So loan given, loan taken, these transactions were not covered in section 188. They will be covered here because it's a transfer of resources. So there is a conflict between this accounting standard and 188. We will have to disclose the loan transactions also in the respective disclosure. But when we go to section 188 CARO reporting, relevant clause in CARO, there we will say ki if there are only loan transactions in company, there we will have to say ki there are no transactions which attract provisions of 188. But there will be related party transactions disclosure in the balance sheet. So that is a very contradicting thing. Does not talk to each other, but it is there because the both regulations say differently. Then what are the disclosures? Actual disclosures. Name of the related party and nature of relationship where control exists, whether or not there are any related party transactions. So if there are no transactions, but there is a control, you will have to report the name of the company and type of control. So if you have a holding company, you have a subsidiary company. With subsidiary, you don't transact anything, but there is a control. So you will have to report that name of that subsidiary in your financial statements. So this is the subsidiary and this is the name of the subsidiary and nature of relationship is, let's say, 75% subsidiary. That you will have to mention. Even if there are no transactions. Now, if there are transactions between the related parties, whether because of control or significant influence, whatever, then this type of disclosure is to be given. Name of the related party, description of the relationship, description of nature of business, nature of transactions, value of transactions, any other relevant element, balances outstanding at the balance sheet date, and amounts written off or written back in respect of debts due from or to the related party. Now this disclosure has to be given for the previous year also. We miss this disclosure many times because for the previous year comparative figures will have to be given. Schedule 3 requires you whatever figure you give for current year, you will have to give it for last year also. So for all the transactions, previous year figures will have to be given for the balance outstanding also. Then aggregation of similar transaction is allowed. So if we are purchasing 100 items from a subsidiary, you may not write all 100 items in your financial statements. You can aggregate them, purchase of goods, but you should not. Again, aggregation of purchase of goods and purchase of fixed asset is not allowed. So that should not be done. That should be disclosed separately. So next is illustrative disclosure. This is given by standard. So these columns are there. Holding company, there can be multiple holding companies, but all put together we can give figures here. Subsidiary companies, fellow subsidiaries, this also can be multiple. Associates, KMP, relatives of KMP, and total. So all this can be summarized and given in this format. So we can use this table for current year and a similar table for last year, or we can add one line in between and put bracket and say key figures in bracket relate to previous year. That can be done, but this has to be done in this way. This is only illustrative, so any other transaction will have to be added. Okay. Now, key differences between Companies Act and AS 18. So foremost different, striking difference is the scope is different. The section 188 deals with the procedure of entering into RPT. That means if you want to enter into a contract with related party, you will have to go to the board of directors, then obtain their permission. If the limit exceeds, then you will have to go to shareholder and obtain permission, and then only you can enter into that contract. Whereas AS 18 only talks about disclosure. It does not talk about procedure, how to enter that contract. So the disclosure requirement are given by AS 18. There are no such disclosure requirements under AS section 188. Then definition of actually we have covered these differences at the time of respective discussion. Definition of relative under Companies Act is much wider than it is 18. We have seen that son's daughter, stepson, all those are not covered in AS 18. KMPs as per Companies Act are listed like MD, CFO, CS, CEO, etc. AS 18 has a open definition. Anyone who is in charge of any financial matter, financial decision, policy decision can be a KMP for AS 18. Then director KMP of holding company is a related party under Companies Act, but no such provision under AS 18. Remember that prescribed, as may be prescribed, there they have prescribed that director of a holding company is also a related party under Companies Act, but it is not so under AS 18. Then no list of transactions reported is available in AS 18. It's an open definition. 188 gives that list. Transaction in the nature of loans even taken are not covered. However, they will be covered in AS 18. So these are some of the differences we have already discussed. Then I think this is okay. This covers the accounting standard aspect also. Then we go to one important section, section 185 of Companies Act 2013, that relates to loan to directors, etc. Now, loan to directors has a history. This section was initially notified on 12 September 2013, which prohibited any kind of advancement of loan to directors, which was a stricter section with limited exceptions. These exceptions are still there. We will discuss them later, like advance to MD or full-time directors as a part of service, etc. They are still there. We will discuss later. Then, by way of Companies Amendment Act 2015, dated 29th May 15, certain exemptions were given. So those exemptions are still there. We will discuss them later, because those exemptions relate to guarantees or security given to wholly owned subsidiaries, and guarantees given to banks on behalf of the subsidiaries of the company. They exemptions were given, which are still applicable. Now, one interesting factor is, by way of exemption notification, GSR 463E, 5th June 2015, on specifying 3 conditions, private companies were exempted from the provisions of section 185. So, if a company satisfies these 3 conditions, 185 is not applicable at all. And then came Companies Amendment Act 2017 with effect from 7th May 2018. The entire section was substituted with new one. See, the entire section was substituted in 2018, and the exemption notification is dated 2015, and this new section does not expressly cancel the exemption notification. So whether the exemption notification is still available to private company, because if a new section is inserted and exemption notification has been given to an old section, does that continue till now also? So let us discuss that in brief. Section 462 gives powers to central government to provide exemptions to certain class of companies. Such notification has to be laid in the both houses of parliament, while it is in session, and they have to be approved by both the houses. Supreme Court has held in Parle Exports that the notification which are approved by the parliament are part of law. They are nothing short of law. So exemption notification is also part of law. Central government in past has amended some of the notifications, but it has not done so in case of GSR 464E with respect to section 181. So these notifications are amendment, repeal. Central government has also repealed some notifications, but they have not done so in case of 185. So in my view, the exemption available to private companies with respect to section 185 still stands applicable. If any contrary view is welcome, but I feel this the private companies will still be able to take this benefit of this exemption notification. Then we'll see what are the exemptions by way of GSR 463. We'll first see the exemptions so that we will be able to identify for which company this is applicable and for which company it is not. So 185 will not apply to a private company in whose share capital no other body corporate has invested any money. If company has invested money in other company, the other company cannot take this benefit. only individuals. If the shareholders are individual, then only individual or partnership, then only this exemption is available. All the three conditions have to be satisfied, not only one. So this second condition is if the borrowings of such company from banks or financial institutions or body corporates is less than twice of its paid up share capital or 50 crore rupees, whichever is lower. So again, some limit has been given, twice of its paid up capital or 50 crore, whichever is lower. So if this condition is satisfied, then we go to third condition. Such a company has no default in repayment of such borrowing subsisting at the time of making transaction under this section. So if the company has made some default, it has made some default in repayment or interest has not been paid, then this exemption cannot be taken. So and then the transaction will be prohibited. So all these if all these conditions are satisfied, a private company will be able to take this exemption and save itself from application of this section 185. Now let us see what 185 says. First, what type of advancement is prohibited, directly or indirectly? Now, section 185 direct prohibits advancement of any loan directly or indirectly. So through somebody, if you are giving loan, that is also not allowed. So loan, including any loan represented by a book debt. So any loan directly given to director is not allowed. Through a book debt means if we are paying somebody on behalf of the director, that is also not allowed. That also amounts to loan. Any guarantee or security in connection with any loan from third party. So if a director has taken any loan from third party, the company cannot give any guarantee or provide security in connection with that loan. Now these are the advances which are prohibited. Now to whom such advancement is prohibited? First is any director of the company. You cannot give any loan to any director. You cannot give any guarantee or security in connection of any loan with the director. Director of holding company, that is also covered. Any partner or relative of the director given in A and B. So partner or relative of director or director of holding company are also covered. And any firm in which such director or relative is a partner. So these are the categories to whom advancement of loan is strictly prohibited. The company cannot give any loan to all these parties. Then there are some relaxations. So this is not allowed at all. But the company can advance loan, including loan represented by book debt or guarantee or security in connection with any loan, to any person in whom any of the director is interested. Now, what is this? We will see. Subject to, now company can give loan to an entity in which any of the director is interested, subject to passing of a special resolution in general meeting, where notice of such general meeting shall disclose full particulars of that loan and what is the requirement, and loans are utilized by the borrower for its principal business activities. Now here the auditor scope is extended, because here also in CARO the auditor has to state that whether the provisions of 185 and 186 are complied or not. Here again we will have to see the loans have been given to any entity in whom director is interested. Does that entity use it for its principal business activities or not? That is a duty of the auditor. These duties, in fact, with respect to duties of auditor with respect to 188 also have been given in discussed elaborately by the guidance note on CARO 20, which has been recently issued by the institute. So there we can get all the guidance with respect to this. Now, well, let's see the definition of any person in whom the director is interested. The definition is any private company of which any such director is a director or member. They're pretty simple. The director is director in another company or a member of another company, then it is said that he is interested in that company, and then to that company a company can give loan. To partnership firm where he is a partner, company cannot give, but to company it can give. A body corporate of which 25% of or more voting power exercises control by such director or more such directors together. So two of the directors are let's say controlling 25% of a LLP. LLP is a body corporate, so company can give loan to LLP, but not to a normal partnership. A body corporate whose BOD, MD or manager is accustomed to act in accordance with the instruction by such director or more such directors. So in a way, the directors hold control of the body corporate. Now this is body corporate, so even the companies are covered. So if there is a company whose managing director acts on behalf as per the instruction given by company A's director, so company A can give that loan to the other company where the director acts in accordance with the Mr. A. So that is possible. Then exclusions, there are some exclusions given. I was talking about this. By way of this 29th May 2015, certain exemptions were given. These were those exemptions. Giving money to managing director or full-time director as a condition of service extended to all employees or pursuant to a scheme approved by members by special resolution. So if company has a policy to give advance to some advance to all the employees for their expenditures and then they claim as a reimbursement, then you can give it to a managing director, full-time director also. So this is not a violation of section 185, but it should be for all, or there should be a scheme approved by members in a special resolution, by a special resolution. Then in case of a company whose ordinary course of business is to provide loans or guarantees or securities and which charges interest at a rate higher than the prevailing yield. If the company's primary business is to give loans, then it can give loans to the directors also. So there is an exclusion. Then loan made or guarantee given or security provided to wholly owned subsidiary. So if subsidiary has taken loan and holding company is giving guarantee, then it is allowed. Then guarantee given or security provided in respect of loan made by any bank or financial institution to a subsidiary company. So any subsidiary company has subsidiary company. Now they are said subsidiary company, not wholly owned subsidiary. So my 51% subsidiary also has taken loan from Bank of India, and I am the holding company gives guarantee for that loan, then it is allowed. Here they have not mentioned direct loan, so it is only guarantee. The company cannot still give loans, and provided that these two C and D should be used for principal business activities by the subsidiary company, subsidiary or wholly owned subsidiary companies. So let us discuss the penalties. The company shall be punishable with fine which shall not be less than 5 lakh rupees, but which may extend to 25 lakh rupees. So which shall not be less than the 5 lakh rupees. So minimum fine is 5 lakh rupees. Therefore, this is important. If ROC catches, this fine is leviable and the act is saying it will not be less than 5 lakh rupees, which may extend to 25. Then every officer of the company who is in default shall be punishable with imprisonment for a term which may extend to 6 months, or with fine which shall not be less than 25 lakh rupees, which may extend to 5 lakh rupees, but which may extend to 25 lakh rupees. So stringent penalties are there. Then the director or other person to whom any loan is advanced or security is given or provided in connection with any loan taken by him shall be punishable. The director is also punishable with imprisonment which may extend to 6 months, or with the fine which shall not be less than 5 lakhs, extend to 25 lakhs, or with both. So you see the penalties are very, very strict, stringent penalties are there. So we need to ensure that the provisions of 185 are strictly followed, because it is duty cast on the auditors also to check, because we are in a way reporting in our Caro report that everything is correct, 188 is followed, 185 is followed. I think we should always check this first, check from all angles that it is followed, and then only we can comment positively. Then this is a summary given to understand what 185 says. So directors, loan to directors is not allowed, relative director not allowed, directors of holding company is not allowed, partner of the firm in which director is a partner, it is not allowed, partnership firm in which director or director of its holding company is a partner, it is not allowed. So these are the cases where giving loan or guarantee or security is absolutely not allowed. What is allowed is private company having common directors or members. This is allowed. Then body corporate in which director, we have seen this, or by two or more such directors together exercise 25% or more of the total voting power at general meeting. And body corporate in which board of directors is accustomed to act on the directions of or instructions of board of lending company. So these three transactions only are allowed. These five are absolutely not allowed. So we need to be careful in assessing this and commenting in Caro report. Then reporting under Caro, the clause 4 says, with respect of loans, investments, guarantees, and security, whether provisions of 185 and 186 of the Companies Act have been complied with. If not, provide the details thereof. So it is very specifically says the auditor has to comment whether the provisions of 185 have been complied with, and if not, the details thereof. The details will have to be given each loan wise, where there is a contravention of the provision, and the amounts will have to be disclosed. Now, the every director needs to give form MBT1, which summarizes or which states in which entities he is interested. So the auditor can go through that. The registers maintained under 189 also are the source of information for the auditor to check in which companies or entities the directors are interested. So we can take help of that also. So even the indirect loans are covered. So indirect loans means I'm giving loans, company A giving loan to company B, and company B giving loan to company C, or director C, and C is the director in company A. Then also this is an indirect loan which is not allowed. So acceptance and giving of loans is also area which the auditor should look into. Okay. So this was about related party transactions. This was the today's topic. I was specifically told to cover one more thing along with this, because that post incorporation compliances. That means typically what happens is that companies are incorporated by, let's say, company secretaries or a chartered accountant, and the company, once company is incorporated, then all the compliances which are mandatory are not done. In many cases, the compliances are not looked that seriously. So I was told that I need to cover this post incorporation compliances also. So I have again once more one presentation for this. So this is now you must be aware that the ROC or MCA has come up with the SPICE Plus thing to incorporate the company. Now this is a part of ease of doing business of the government of India. The new new series of forms called SPICE Plus. This has replaced old SPICE forms. So all the new company incorporations on or after 23rd February 2020 will have to be done under SPICE Plus. It cannot be done under SPICE. Now SPICE is simplified pro forma for incorporating company electronically plus. It offers 10 services by 3 central government ministries and departments. This is MCA, Corporate Affairs, Labor and Employment, and Department of Revenue of Ministry of Finance, and one state department, Maharashtra State. And this is single window for multiple services. So what are the services offered through SPICE Plus? First is name reservation, then bouquet of services as under incorporation of a company, application for a DIN, PAN and TAN application, EPFO, Employee Provident Fund Organization, and ESIC, State Insurance Corporation, registration, opening a bank account, professional tax registration in Maharashtra State, and GST registration. It is optional. The thing is, this is only optional. All these services are a part of incorporation process now. So these are all mandatory processes. Now this PT registration, PT, PAN, TAN are always applied at the time of incorporation. These profession Provident Fund and ESIC does not give any separate number later on. So it has to be applied with the at the time of incorporation only. Let us go to actual compliances. Now this we have not covered because this is a very technical thing which will take at least 1-2 hours to explain all these processes. So The post incorporation compliances here, first is board meeting, very important compliance that is missed by in many cases. The company is required to hold first meeting of board of directors within 30 days of incorporation. Then to hold minimum 4 meetings of board of directors every year in such a manner that the time gap between 2 consecutive board meetings should not exceed 120 days. So in board report we will have to write when the board meetings were conducted. So there we need to take this precaution that time gap between 2 consecutive board meetings should not exceed 120 days. That precaution we will have to take. And there should be minimum 4 meetings in a year. Participation of the directors can be in person or through video conferencing or other audiovisual means which are capable of recording and recognizing the participation of the directors and storing the proceedings with date and time. Now with this corona thing in place, the ROC has again extended time limit for approval of accounts through video conferencing. Now earlier what used to happen is that certain items cannot be transacted through video conferencing. One of the item was approval of board report, the annual audited financial statements. They cannot be approved through video conferencing. The directors will have to be present in person and approve them. So if quorum is not present personally, the approval of accounts cannot be done. But now, since there are restrictions on travel, the company, the MCA, has relaxed this provision and said that till September 2020, these board meetings can be conducted through video conferencing, in which the approval of accounts can also happen. So this is a very, very important thing where a company has foreign directors. Let's say one director is in India and one in Germany. So German director cannot come to India. In that case, with earlier provisions, the approval of accounts cannot happen. Either the Indian director should go there or German director should come here. Then only the approval of accounts happens. Otherwise, it cannot happen. But now the provision has been relaxed. So through video conferencing also we can adopt this. But the only precaution we need to take is there should be a recording of the proceedings with date and time. So that should be ensured. Then registered office. The company is mandatorily have a registered office within 30 days of incorporation. Registered office should be capable of receiving and acknowledging all communications and notices as may be addressed and furnished to the register. So filing of INC 22 is required to be done within 30 days. So every company has to have a registered office with its name and address should be affixed at registered office on all places of business in regional languages, with or without any other language. If you are using English language and you are in Maharashtra, you will have to put it on Marathi board also. Or if you are in Karnataka, you will have to put a Kannada board also. Then you have to prepare your own seal where your name, the company's name, will have to be engraved in legible characters, and all stationery items that you use like letterheads, invoice heads will contain name, address, SIN, contact details, and website address to be printed. Then appointment of first auditor. This is an important thing for auditor also. Now, appointment of first auditor of a company to be made within 30 days by BOD. This is the only time where, apart from casual vacancy, the auditor is appointed by board of directors. Failing which, the shareholders can appoint such auditor within 90 days as an EOGM. So if board of directors do not appoint any auditor within 30 days, the shareholders have authority to call extraordinary general meeting and appoint the auditor within 90 days. So first auditor shall hold office until the conclusion of first AGM. At first AGM, an individual or a firm of chartered accountants can be appointed as auditor, who shall hold office from the conclusion of that meeting until the conclusion of 6th annual general meeting. So any appointment of auditor has to be done for 5 years now, and ratification of the appointment every year has been done away. So no need of ratification, but every year the auditor has to give his consent that he is willing to be appointed as auditor, and if appointed as auditor, his appointment will be within the limits prescribed in 139 that he will have to give. So every year that those two documents will go to company, there is no new requirement of ratification of the appointment of the auditor. So once he is appointed for 5 years, he is appointed. Then with written consent we have spoken. The limit on number of audits is 20 as per Companies Act. However, there are certain exclusions while counting those limit of 20 companies. This is one-person companies, small companies, dormant companies, private companies having paid up share capital less than 100 crores are excluded. So when you count this limit of 20, all these companies will have to be excluded and other companies have to be counted, and the count should not be greater than 20 companies per auditor. If there is an audit firm, then it will be per partner. Then disclosure of interest. This is third thing. Disclosure of interest by directors. Disclosure of director in their interest in any companies, body corporates, firms, or other association of individuals, including respective shareholding and first board meeting in which he participates as a director. So every director has to give form MBP1. MBP1 we can show. So this is form MBP1, notice of interest by director. So it is addressed to board of directors. Name this being a director in the company hereby give notice of my interest or concern in following company or companies, body corporates, firms, or other associations. So serial number, name of the companies or body corporates, nature of interest, shareholding percentage, and date on which interest was changed. This type of declaration has to be given by every director every year. So it is duty of the auditor to check this whether this MBP1 has been filed or not, because this gives a lot of information for related parties also. So the first board meeting in which he participated as a director, and at first board meeting of every financial year thereafter, he has to give this declaration. In statutory registers, the company needs to maintain following statutory registers at the registered office: register of members, debenture holders, any other securities holders, and as per 188, register of 189, register of contracts or arrangements with which directors are interested. So these registers will have to be maintained at the registered office apart from the books of accounts. Books of accounts will anyway have to be maintained. Then issue of certificates. This is the major compliance, because many times this is not complied with. Share certificates are not issued to the shareholders. So for different class of shareholders, the time limits are different. So in case of subscribers to MOA, within 2 months from the date of incorporation. Now there is a varied views on this. Subscribers are MOA are not. I mean, for them, the return of allotment pass 3 is not required to be filed. So pass 3 is filed only when the amount is received. So if what will happen if subscribers don't put their money? Still, I believe still the share certificates will have to be issued to them, because they have agreed that they will put money, and if they have not paid that money, the company can sue them. But the share certificates will have to be issued, because in guidance note to schedule 3, there is a specific clause which mentions that if subscribers to memorandum have not paid their money, subscription money to the company, then also the company will not treat this as unpaid shares, unpaid capital. This is subscribed and fully paid capital, and corresponding asset will be created. So there are still doubts in the industry whether share certificates can be issued to subscribers even if they are not paid money. Then second, in case of allotment of shares can happen only when the amount is received. So after allotment within 2 months, the share certificates will have to be given to the shareholders. This is in case of subsequent allotments, not for the initial subscription. Then transfer of shares within 1 month from the date of receipt of instrument of transfer, and allotment of debentures within 6 months from the date of allotment. So these are the provisions for share certificates. Then statutory registers. Declaration for commencement of business. Now this is the new requirement which has, I think, come from last year. So before commencement of business, after incorporation, the company needs to file a declaration within 180 days from the incorporation of company in form INC 20A. So before filing this form, the company cannot commence its business. It cannot issue any invoice. It cannot borrow any loan. What does it say? That declaration that all the subscribers to MOA have remitted the total value of shares agreed to be taken by them in the company's bank account. So what we were talking earlier, see, in 180 days we need to file this INC 20A, and time limit for issuing share certificate to subscribers to MOA within 2 months. So if within 2 months the subscribers don't pay money, we will have to issue share certificates. But the company cannot start business unless they remit money in next 4 months, because company has to file this form within 180 days. Form to be verified by a chartered accountant, company secretary, cost accountant in practice, and proof of payment like bank statement showing credit entries or NEFT RTGS receipts are to be attached to this form. Then this is important. Post this first financial year, this is 241, section 241 defines the first financial year. It defines as the financial year ending 31st March is the financial year for a company, but it has some variation also. So let's say date of incorporation of company is 1st April 2019, then the financial year will be 1st April 19 to 31st March 20. Simple. If date of incorporation is 31st October 19, then the financial year will be 31st October 19 to 31st March 20. If the date of incorporation is after January to March, any date between January to March, let's say 1st January, then it will be 1st January 20 to 31st March 21, the next March, not the immediate March. So for 3 months, the company doesn't prepare accounts. It is for the 15 months. If the date of incorporation is 30th March, then 30th March 20 to 31st March 21. So it is always greater than 1 year for the first financial year for the companies incorporated between January to March. So we had a discussion on this. If let's suppose this company, which has been incorporated on 1st January 2020, it will prepare financial statements for 1st January 20 to 31st March 21. This is food for thought. What will happen if this company does business exceeding 1 crore till 31st March 20? It will not prepare financial statements from 1st January 20 to 31st March 20, but it will have to file its income tax return. That can be done on a provisional basis. But what would you do for tax audit? You cannot file form 3CA, because for 3CA you need audited accounts, audited financial statements, and the company is not preparing financial statements as on 31st March 20. So I believe the company may have to file 3CB. The auditor may have to file 3CB for this. This is the only case where, in case of a company, 3CB can be filed. Of course, this is my interpretation. Any other interpretation is welcome. So that can practically have this kind of a problem. Annual general meetings. The first annual general meeting of the company will be held within 9 months from the date of closing of the first financial year. So first financial year, wherever it ends, company has time of 9 months after that to hold its first AGM. Normally it is 6 months. So on September we all hold our annual general meetings. For first annual general meeting, the time limit is extended to 9 months. Subsequent AGMs will be held in 6 months from the date of closing. The company also needs to ensure that no more than 15 months shall elapse between 2 consecutive AGMs. So you will have to hold a meeting next AGM before expiry of 15 months from the current AGM. ROC has the power to extend the time limit by 3 months for special reasons, an application made by the company. So the company will have to make an express application for the extension of time limit, then only the ROC will extend. And ROC at its discretion can extend. It may not extend also. AGM will have to be held on working day. It cannot be held on Sunday or a national holiday between 9 AM to 6 PM at registered office or some other place within the same city or town where registered office is situated. There is an exception to this. On receipt of consent from all the shareholders in advance, written or electronically, AGM can be held anywhere in India. So that is a relaxation given, not because of COVID, it is always there, but for during this COVID scenario, this is relevant because the shareholders may not be able to travel from one part of India to other. If 2 or 3 shareholders are at one place, they can hold a meeting there. Then filing of annual return. This is recurring thing. Every year, the company will have to file its annual return in MGT 7, containing particulars as they stood at the close of financial year regarding various details like registered office, principal place of business, principal business activities, holding of subsidiary companies, shareholding, promoters, directors, KMPs, etc. So all these information is captured in MGT 7, which we will have to file. The company has to file within 60 days from the AGM, and where there is no AGM held, within 60 days from the last date on which AGM should have been held. So there is no way. There is no way out for the company that the AGM is not held. The annual return still will have to be filed within 60 days from the last date on which AGM should have been held. For this, there is a penalty of ₹100 per day for the continuing default. Placement of copy of annual return on the website of the company and web link of the same to be given in board's report. So this is a new requirement. The board report should contain a web link of the same of the annual return, and the annual return will have to be uploaded on the website of the company. Then this is the last thing, filing of financial statements, section 137. To file within 30 days to the ROC, 30 days of AGM, to the ROC a copy of duly adopted financial statements, including consolidated financial statements, if any, along with all the required documents. Section 137 gives this. These all are from. This is form AOC 4. These are all electronic forms where a scanned copy of documents is uploaded. In case of XBRL filing, scanned document is not there. All the data is captured in the AOC 4 itself, and it is uploaded. Where the financial statements are not adopted by the AGM, they will be filed within ROC as unadopted within 30 days of AGM, which shall be treated as provisional. So there can be a situation where AGM is held, but the audited accounts are not adopted by the company, so they are not final. Still, the company needs to file them within 30 days of AGM, and they will be considered as provisional by the ROC. Then when the accounts are finalized, then again they will have to be uploaded, and then the additional fees which is applicable will be paid by the company. If the financial statements are adopted in an adjourned AGM, they shall be filed within 30 days of adjourned AGM with additional fees. So if annual general meeting is scheduled on 30th September, that is, it is adjourned to say 7th of June, then there 30 days of adjourned meeting we will have to file. If it is not filed within 30 days, then additional fees will be applicable. Whereas there is no AGM held, financial statements to be filed within 30 days from the last date on which AGM should have been held. Now again, in this case, we are assuming that AGM is not held, but the financial statements are approved, audited and approved by the board of directors. Therefore, the AGM, with the fact that the AGM has not been held, they will have to be uploaded to the ROC, and they will be treated as provision. For one-person company, the time limit for filing of financial statements is 180 days from the closure of financial year. So it is effectively till 27th September 2020. So the financial statements will have to be filed before this date. So majority, what I had thought has been covered. So we have still half an hour. We can take questions if you are there.
Yeah, thank you, Sriram. Before we go ahead with the question answer session, may I request CA Keyur Bayani to give a brief introduction of the learned speaker, which could not happen at the start of the session because of some technical reasons. Keyur, can you please go ahead with the introduction? Keyur? Hello. Okay, we'll take up some questions raised by a few of the participants. The question is like, if prior consent required under section 188 or subsequent consent will also do.
Is prior consent
Can you
required
hear
under
it?
188? Yeah. Is prior consent
Yeah.
required under 188? Subsequent consent will also do. I think subsequent consent will also do, but it will have to be ratified in the next board meeting.
Okay. Then one query has been raised. I think we need to unmute it. Santoshji, Santosh Singashane has raised a query. Santoshji, can you hear it? Hello, Santoshji. Hello. He is also not available, I think. Any other queries by the participants? I think Keyur is online. Keyur, can you please give introduction of the speaker, which could not happen at the start? Yes. Yeah, please.
Hello. Yeah. Am I audible? Hello?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Hello. Good evening, everyone. Hello, Mr. Shahrukh. This has to be happened in the start, but due to some technical issues, I wasn't able to introduce a learned speaker. He's Mr. Srirang Hardikar, FCA, and his year of passing is 2012. In the span of 8 years of his working, he has worked 6 years with Chitle and Company, Pune, as an branch in charge, Pune branch in charge. And for 2 years, he is associated with Gokhale and Associates as an associate. His field of works are statutory audits, internal financial controls, tax audits, and transfer pricing. So now I'll ask Mr. Anand to continue.
Yeah, thank you, Keyur. And thanks a lot, Srirang. I request Sanjay Raut, sir, to give official vote of thanks to the learned speaker. Sanjay, please.
Actually, hello. Today topic is related party transaction provision disclosure under Companies Act 2013. It is a 18. Coincidentally, our today's speaker says Srirang Hardikar is a related party to our CPS study circle. So he has shown a various light on this not cover Act and AS 18 and invest. What are the board of directors? Then again he has explained what are the registered to be kept under section 189. What are the penalties for violation? Then CARO 2020 clause 13 disclosures. Then what are the differences in organization is be reporting under. Again, he has given another topic. Comes to my last moment. That post company incorporation compliances. He has very nicely explained the Spice Plus services. What are the services of the Spice Plus? What are the appointment, etc. So everybody will be agree that yes, although the topic is on various sections, he has explained in simplified manner. So on behalf of CP Study Circle Panvel, Srirang Hardikar, and thanks to very attendance also for giving attendees also for giving us valuable time.
Hello. Hello, Sanjay ji,
Ah.
your voice is not audible.
I have given proposed order. Hello.
Sanjay ji, your voice is not audible.
How it is ordered?
Okay, we'll take up couple of questions, Srirang ji. There is one question raised like, do you think there is a requirement for aligning definitions of related parties in Companies Act and accounting standards?
How can I comment on this? There is a need wherein all the reporting frameworks will give the same definition, so reporting will be in sync with all the legislations, but it is in the best interest of the reporting enterprises that everything is synchronized, so there is no mismatch in any reporting, but that has something to do with the respective authorities.
Okay. Another question, whether there is any specific reporting to be done by the auditor where the loan is given to the director. Hello.
Obviously. Yes.
Can I go ahead with the question?
Yeah, please.
Whether there is any specific reporting to be done by the auditor where the loan is given to the director, and how do you verify whether it is utilized for the business purpose by that specific director?
There is a specific disclosure or a reporting by auditor in CARO. So there is a specific clause in CARO where auditor needs to say that all the provisions of 185 and 186 are complied or not. Now it is very difficult if the loan is being given to a concern in which director is interested. As far as possible, the auditor should go and check where the loans have been utilized, or otherwise the auditor should take a declaration from the concerned director, that he has applied those funds for his principal business activity only. Likewise, we do in acceptance of loan from director, we take a declaration from him stating that they are given from own funds and not borrowed funds. Similar declaration we can take.
Okay, is there any specific format? Is there any specific format for the, or general just a declaration will be suffice the thing?
General declaration should suffice. There is no specific format given by the Act.
And it has to be given in the board meeting or the AGM? How frequently means?
See, it has to be given. It has to be given to the auditor. So at the year end, this can be given to the auditor for his records.
Okay. One more hand is raised by Mr. Anand Keshav. I'll just unmute him. Jomonji, can you unmute Anand Keshav?
Just a second, let me. Anand?
Anand Keshav. He has raised the hand.
Yes, unmuted from here.
Anandji?
Yes. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, good evening. I am Anand Keshav. I have a question. There are two subsidiaries, Indian subsidiaries of foreign multinational companies. It's 100% subsidiaries, and in both the companies, the directors are common. They have no shareholding, nothing, but both are working director. But for the convenience sake, both the directors are in each other company, and they have intercompany transaction which is at arm's length. Whether they have to meet the register of contracts.
So there are two companies which are a subsidiary company of the same holding company,
Yes.
which is located outside India. So they are
Yeah. The
fellow
holding company
subsidiaries.
is outside India.
Yes.
The holding company is outside India. The two Indian companies are in India.
Okay. So they are fellow subsidiaries in a way. Right?
Yes.
So what is your question?
My
Register of
question
contracts
is
has to be
whether
maintained or not?
yes.
Okay. So as per the definition of section 188, the fellow subsidiaries are related parties. So the transaction between both the companies will amount to a related party if they are not at arm's length or not at in the ordinary course of business. So if they are in ordinary course of business and they are at arm's length, then the subsection 1 of section 188 is not applicable. Therefore, 189 doesn't become applicable, but both the conditions should be satisfied. They should be in the normal course of business and at arm's length. Then the register of contracts need not be maintained.
Yeah. Yes. That's basically we are. It's at arm's length and it is in the normal course of business only. So
Okay,
then
so
there
that is outside the scope of 188.
Okay. Thank you.
Srirangji, there is another question. Is the board required to approve all the related party transactions?
Yes, all the related party transactions to which subsection 1 of section 188 applies will have to be approved by the board, at least by the board. If the limit exceeds, then the shareholders will have to approve. But
Okay.
only to those transactions where 188 applies. If they are in ordinary course of business and at arm's length, then 188 does not apply. Then in that case, board approval is not required.
Okay, you mean to say if it is at the arm's length, no need of any approval, like only the
Yes.
disclosure is sufficient.
Disclosure will come as per AS 18. That will come.
Okay. Okay. Any more questions?
Anandji, I have a question.
Yeah.
Actually, one director has submitted resignation to the board of directors, but there was no response from them. Then finally, he himself submitted DR 11 to ROC. Is it valid? Is it good enough?
I did get your question. Can you please repeat it?
One director has given resignation to the board of directors,
Oh, okay, okay.
but there was no response from them. Then finally, he himself submitted DIR 11 to ROC along with acknowledgement and resignation. So is it valid?
Okay.
Is it good enough?
I have not done this, so I will have to check first.
Okay, fine.
Okay. Can we attend to query raised by Santosh Singhasne ji? Jomonji, can you unmute him? Santosh ji,
Sure.
Santosh Singhasne. Santosh ji, are you there?
Yeah, he's unmuted.
Santosh ji? Okay, he is not getting connected, I think.
Okay, whatever queries are there, you can email me. So I will try to answer as many as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
That can also be done if it is not connected.
So request all the participants to mail the queries to the Panvel CP study circle so that we can forward it to the learned speaker and you'll get a reply of it. So thank you very much, Srirang ji, and thank you all the
Sir,
participants.
just a minute. I want to say something.
Yeah.
Sir, I'm sorry, this session was not as fluent as I would want it to be, because this is for the first time I'm doing through webinar. So there is no response from the participants. I can see those faces. So I was typically blank. What should I say? That's fine.
The query, some technical reasons were there at the start. The introduction could not be given, and the question I have sent a message in the chat box. The participants can raise their queries through chat messages or the questions. So whatever questions were there, those were raised through chat messages, and we took it at the end of the session. And even if there are few more queries, we can definitely go ahead with the mail part, and you can answer it. Also the vote of thanks part, maybe Sanjay ji is placed in Alibag, so maybe the network connectivity is weak over there, so he was not audible in between, could not hear the exact vote of thanks, so I apologize for it. But yeah, in general the session was conducted continuously without any interruption on the technical part. So I would like to thank Srirang ji for the nice presentation and all the participants for a good response. And thank you very much. So we conclude the session. Thank you.
Thank you.